Hello all, a very good morning. And first of all, wish you all a very happy Doctor's Day, upcoming doctors. Okay, we'll be finishing the squint somehow today. Of course, the Monday and Tuesday videos will be uploading. There was some problem with the systems here, so we couldn't continue the class also. So coming to our squint class, Wirtz 4 dot test. So this is a test for binocular single vision to know whether the patient is having binocular single vision or any diplopia. That is what we know in this Wirtz 4 dot test. Actually, here you see there are 4 dots. One is red in color, one is white in color, and there are 2 green color dots. So this is present in the screen. Okay. Now the patient is given to wear a pair of goggles. The goggle has got a red part and a green part. Usually the red color we wear on the right eye and green we wear on the left eye. Usually in Wirtz 4 dot test, we display 4 dots. One dot is in red color, one dot is in white color, and 2 dots are in green color. These 4 dots we show to the patient. And the patient is given a pair of goggles. The goggles has red color on one eye and left on the right eye. R for R. You remember, red is present on the right side and left. Green color is present on the left side. So the patient is made to wear a pair of goggles with red color on the right eye and green color on the left eye. And this is how the 4 dots are shown to him, either at a distance of 6 meters or at a distance of closed lens, that is 33 centimeters. Now what we do is, here the basic mechanism what you have to remember is, see, this red color sees only red color things. This green part of the goggle sees only green color things. Okay. So remember, in Wirtz 4 dot test, we show him one red dot, 2 green dots, and a white dot. We give him a pair of goggles which has red color on the right eye and green on the left eye. Now the principle here is, the red goggle sees only the red color part, whereas the green one sees only the green color part. So a normal patient should be able to see one red, 2 greens, and one gray color. The white color gets a mixture of both red and green and gives a slightly grayish color to it. Hence, a normal person who is having binocular single vision, through the right eye he will see one red dot, and through the left eye he will see 2 green dots, and through both eyes he will see one gray color dot in place of the white one. That is how a normal person sees. Suppose the person has got a squint and his left eye is suppressed and only his right eye is functioning. Suppose the person has a squint, his left eye went into suppression and only the right eye is present. So through the right eye, he sees only 2 red colors. So through the right eye, he will see 2 red color things. That is one normal red, and his white will also appear as red color when only he is seeing through the right eye. Suppose the patient has got a right eye suppression and only his left eye is functioning. Suppose the patient's left eye is only functioning and right eye is not functioning. It went into suppression because of squint. Then as only the left eye is functioning, through the green goggle, the patient sees 3 green. That is 2 green color things which are normally present. And this white dot also appears green in color when seen through this left goggle. And similarly, if the patient has got a diplopia, that is double vision, he sees 5 dots. 5 dots because 3 green and 2 red. 2 red because this one red here and 1 red in the place of white, and 3 green, 2 green on either side, and this white also becomes green. So he sees 5 dots. It can be crossed diplopia or uncrossed diplopia. About that, it is very difficult to leave it. So normally red goggle, green goggle. Red goggles is the red color, green goggles is the green color. So red color, you can see this one dot red one, and this white one will also appear red. So if right is functioning and left eye is suppressed, you will see 2 red dots. If left is functioning and right is suppressed, to the left you will see only 3 green dots. If both eyes are functioning and is having normal binocular single vision, he will see all the 4 dots, but this fourth one will appear gray in color because of mixture of red and green. If he has a diplopia, he will see 5 colors or 5 dots, that is 3 green and 2 red. Okay. So similarly, what are the other tests? All these tests we covered: cover test, uncover, alternate cover, prism bar, all we have discussed. Now only thing we are left with is Hirschberg's corneal reflex test. So what is this Hirschberg's corneal reflex test? Ask the patient to look straight and focus a torchlight onto the patient. So when you focus a torchlight onto the patient, you can see the reflection of the torchlight at the center of the pupil. You see in the right eye center, the reflection of the torchlight is seen. Similarly, in the left eye center of the pupil, the reflection of the torchlight is seen. So this is the right eye and this is the left eye. So the pupil is seen at the center. The torchlight's reflection is seen at the center of the pupil. So this is known as Hirschberg's corneal reflex test. This is called so because Hirschberg is the name of the scientist, and it is a corneal reflex. That is the light which you are showing from the torchlight. It is getting reflected through the cornea and it is appearing to be falling at the center. So usually in a normal patient, this corneal reflex, that is the light, some part of light which is reflecting from the cornea, appears to be present at the center of the pupil. That is Hirschberg's corneal reflex test. So now what happens? Suppose in orthophoria, both the light reflexes will be falling at the center. Suppose there is an esotropia, the eyeball has turned inside. So the reflex will fall somewhere little towards the outer side. See here, eyeball is turning inside. that's why reflex will fall towards the outside, that is near the pupillary margin or beyond the pupillary margin. Similarly, in exotropia, if eyeball is turned outside, the reflex will be falling near the inner margin. Similarly, if the eyeball rotates upwards, the reflex will falling at the lower margin. Similarly, if the eyeball is rotated downwards, the reflex will be falling at the upper margin. So Hirschberg's corneal reflex test is nothing but when you show a bright light of torchlight, some part of the torchlight's light is reflected to the cornea. And in case of a normal person, when there is no squint and both eyes are looking straight, it falls at the center of the pupil in both the eyes. But in case of esotropia, what happens? It falls on the outer part. In case of exotropia, it falls on the inner part, because actually the reflex is at the center, but your eyeball has deviated outside. So reflex will come to the inner margin. Actually, the reflex is at the center. If suppose your eyeball has turned inside, then your reflex will come towards the outer part. So that is how it takes. So similarly, this HCRT quantification also. So here you see the reflex is exactly at the center. Now when the eyeball is rotating inside, the reflex is falling at the pupillary margin. When the eyeball is still rotating inside, the eyeball is falling beyond the pupillary margin. When eyeball is totally rotated inside, it is falling away from the limbus, almost away from the limbus. So there is a quantification. So when the HCRT is exactly at the center, it is 0 degrees. When it falls at the pupillary margin, it is equal to 15 degrees of deviation. When it falls between the pupillary margin and between the limbus border, it is roughly 30 degrees. And when it falls at the limbus, it is 45 degrees. When it falls beyond the limbus, it is more than 45 degrees or almost 70 degrees. So here you see. So normally, if it falls at the center, it is 0 degree. If it falls at the pupillary margin, it is actually 30 degrees. Now here some mistake is there. You don't follow this slide. You just see in your textbook, because different textbooks are giving different versions. So here you just follow. At the center, it is 0. Here it is 15. Here it is 30. And here it is 45. At the center of the pupil, 0 degree. At the pupillary margin, it is 15. In between pupillary margin and the limbus, it is 30 degrees, and beyond the limbus, it is 45 degrees. So that part you remember. Okay. Next, what is Bruckner's reflex? When strabismus is present, the fixing eye has a darker light reflex. Bruckner's reflex is nothing but when you show a bright light into the eyeball, so that you can see the reflex of the retina. See, the retina is usually colorless, but the underlying choroid has got some brownish color because of the blood supply to it. So when you throw the light into the eyeball, what happens is the light reflects from the underlying retina. That means almost as the retina is transparent, the light transmits the rays of light or the color of the light reflected from the retina, which is brown in color. Hence, you can see a reddish glow, red fundal glow is seen. This is the normal case. In a normal eye, when you throw a bright light into the eyeball and you can see a red glow coming from the eyes. So this is known as Bruckner's reflex. When squint is present, the fixing eye has got a darker reflex, whereas the squinting eye has got a lighter reflex. This is only of historical aspect. It is no more followed now. Just remember, Bruckner's reflex means the red fundal glow which is seen. Next, what is Krimsky's test? So Krimsky's test is nothing but same your HCRT, Hirschberg's corneal reflex test. So actually in prism bar cover test, what you did is you increased the power of the prism till there was no movement of the eyeball. In prism bar cover test, what you did is you kept a prism in front of the eye, and then you increased the power of the prism till the time there was no movement of the opposite eye by performing alternate cover uncover test. But here what you do is you put a prism and you see where the reflex is falling. Reflex is falling here somewhere. Now you increase the prism power some more. So keep on increasing the power of the prism till the reflex falls at the center of the pupil. So in Krimsky's test, you increase the power of the prism that till the time you get the pupillary reflex at the center, because the other eye automatically, because of Hering's law, and as the prism deviates the image of the right eye, automatically because of Hering's law to take up fixation, this eyeball deviates inside, and exactly at the center of the pupil, the reflex comes. So that will be the amount of deviation. This is Krimsky's test. It is not of much necessary for you. Just remember that usage of prisms till the pupil reflex, till the corneal light reflex comes to the center. That is the principle of Krimsky's test. You just remember about the Hirschberg's corneal reflex test that they will ask you in your exam. Okay. So here you see this eyeball has deviated inside. Now you put a prism. When you put a prism, the eyeball is deviating this side. When you increase the power of the prism, the HCRT has almost come to the center. So just to remember what is HCRT, when a torchlight is shown into the eyes, the corneal light reflex falls at the center of the pupil. So if it is falling at the center, it is normal. If it falls at a pupil margin, it is 15 degree. It falls between the pupillary margin and the limbus, it is 30. If it falls at the limbus, it is 45. So that's about the Hirschberg's corneal reflex test. If you use a prism to bring the HCRT to center, that is known as Krimsky's test. Okay. So modified Krimsky's test is, see, here you are putting the prism in front of the normal eye. So when you put it in front of the normal eye, it is known as Krimsky's test. But when you put the prism in front of the abnormal eye, then it is, and do the neutralization, then it is known as modified Krimsky's test. Modified Krimsky test is in front of the deviating eye. All these are not necessary for you. In PG entrance, they might ask you, just know what is that. So what is the treatment of concomitant squint? Spectacles itself, example for accommodative esotropia or some kind of exotropia, and any type of squint. Initially, if there is any refractive error, try giving the spectacles. You wait for 3 months. With spectacles, if full refractive error correction is there, and if the squint is normalizing, it's okay. If it, and along with that, if there is any amblyopia you feel, you do the occlusion therapy, which I told you in the beginning classes. Similarly, you can do orthoptic exercises. I told you in my previous classes, those near convergence exercises, deviating towards the outer side and all these things. And if all these three fail, initially for any patient, we don't go for surgery straight ahead. First, we try with conservative management like spectacles or occlusion therapy for amblyopia and orthoptic exercises. If all these three fail, then we go for squint surgery. Squint surgery can be of two types: strengthening the muscle resection or weakening of the muscle recession. These are the things. Okay, this is how you do an occlusion. Okay, and what is resection? What is recession? So first you learn about resection. So resection, here what you do is you shorten the muscle, thereby increasing the strength. Okay, suppose there is a door. Suppose my hand is like this. Suppose you see like this. Okay, suppose there is a long muscle. If it tries to pull if this much of muscle is there, and if you attach it here, if you pull it, the action is minimal. But if you attach here and pull it, the action will be more. It will be better. That is just like your door, like the hinge joint if you see. So resection is nothing but shortening of the muscle. You see here in this picture, this muscle is inserting here. Now you do a resection and this part of the muscle you remove and you reinsert the muscle here. And resection, what you do is, it is a strengthening of the muscle. So in strengthening of the muscle, what you do is you remove some part of this muscle. See, this part, shaded part of the muscle is removed and the remaining part is brought and sutured to this part. Okay. So here what you do is in resection, it is a strengthening process. In this, what happens is the muscle of this much of amount is cut, completely excised. After excising this, the remaining stump of the muscle which is present, that is brought and sutured to the insertion here. Thereby the power of the muscle increases as the length of the muscle is shortened. So it will be acting more stronger. Okay. Similarly in recession. In recession, what you do is you remove some part of the muscle and you suture it back. So here what you do is it is a lengthening procedure. You lengthen the muscle and you bring it somewhere behind and suture it. So this is the actual origin. So some part of muscle removed and it is sutured behind. So that is recession, which is a weakening procedure. All these are very confusing. You just remember that resection is strengthening of the muscle by cutting some part. Recession is lengthening of the muscle. Only that much you remember, it is enough. Okay. Next, coming to incompetent squint. What is incompetent squint? It is a paralytic squint. Incompetent means you remember paralytic. There could be a paralysis of the extraocular muscle, paralysis of the nerve, or there could be any restrictive pathology. Restrictive pathology, like suppose there is an orbital tumor here, the eyeball won't be rotating. There's paralysis of lateral rectus muscle, eyeball won't be rotating. So these are the various causes of incompetent or paralytic squint. Here heterotropia is different in different cases. I told you in initial example. Suppose this right side lateral rectus muscle is palsied. So when you are looking straight, the angle between both the eyes is same. When you're looking towards the left, the angle between both the eyes is same. But when you look towards the right, actually it should be like this. But because the lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed, this eye doesn't move. So the angle between both these muscles is different. So in primary gaze and left gaze, the angle between both the muscles or both the eyes is same. But when you look towards the right side, the angle between both the eyes will be different. So incompetent squint, the ocular deviation is different in different cases. It is seen in paralytic squint or restrictive squint. Paralytic is muscle palsy or nerve palsy. Restrictive means suppose there is a tumor or some fracture or some hematoma or something, some pathology or some cysticercosis cyst or something which is present here. So that is restricting the eyeball from moving towards the outside. A and B patterns are also some types of incompetent squint. Okay. So paralytic squint, it could be neurogenic, myogenic, or neuromuscular junction. Neuromuscular junction, most common example is myasthenia gravis. Okay. So this is an example of a paralytic squint. See, here the angle between both the eyes is some particular angle is there. Here the angle is different. Here the angle is different. Here the angle between both the eyes is different. Here again the angle is different. It is because here this left eye is paralyzed. The left eye of patient is paralyzed. That's why it is not moving. That's why when the patient is looking straight, the angle of deviation between both the eyes is less. But when the patient is looking towards the right, this left eye is not at all moving because of paralysis. Hence what happens is the angle between both the eyes increases. Similarly, when he sees towards this side, the eyeball is fixed a little amount of lateral gaze. So the angle is little minimized here. So the angle of deviation between both the eyes is different in different cases. So here one angle is there, here one angle is there, here one angle. So everything it is different. Okay. So what are the paralytic squint clinical features? Diplopia, because see, it is not a concomitant squint. If in a concomitant squint, usually it starts at childhood age. So when a child has a concomitant squint, he automatically develops suppression or amblyopia. But this paralytic squint is most commonly seen in adults or elderly patients, suppose in diabetics or hypertensives or after some trauma. That is when you see this paralytic squint. So in paralytic squint, the suppression, usually it is of sudden onset, because paralysis, some hemorrhage in brain or some trauma, whatever it is, it can be of sudden onset. That's why eye still doesn't go into suppression and amblyopia. That's why patient may complain of diplopia. And the diplopia is more in direction of action of paralyzed muscle. Suppose right lateral rectus is paralyzed, when the patient is trying to look in this side, on towards the right side, the diplopia will be more. Similarly, there could be confusion, there could be nausea and vertigo because of diplopia, which is a central mechanism of nausea. And similarly, there is a sudden onset of ocular deviation. Usually, the ocular deviation is sudden in onset in case of a paralytic squint. Whereas in case of a children in a concomitant squint, it is gradual in onset. And paralytic squint is commonly seen in adults. Okay. What are the signs? Primary deviation is the deviation with the normal eye fixing, secondary deviation with the abnormal eye fixing. I already told you during the concomitant squint. In concomitant squint, primary deviation is same as the secondary deviation. What is this primary deviation is? The deviation is number of prism diopters. So when you put a prism with the normal eye fixing, suppose this is the normal eye and this is the abnormal eye. When the normal eye is fixing at a target and you do the prism bar cover uncover test, how much of deviation you get? And when with the abnormal eye is fixing, with the abnormal or the squinting eye fixing, if you do prism bar cover uncover test and you see how much of prism diopters of deviation you are getting. So usually they both are same in case of a concomitant squint, but secondary deviation is more than primary deviation in case of incomitant squint. That is because more amount of neurological impulse is required for the paralytic muscle to set it into action. So secondary deviation is more than primary in case of a paralytic, whereas both are same in case of concomitant squint. There will be restriction of ocular movement in a paralytic squint. Compensatory head posture can be developed by the patient in case of paralytic squint, as well as concomitant squint also it can be seen. False projection and orientation. I told you if the right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed, there is diplopia. Because of diplopia, the object appears as if it is present at some other part. I told you that X, Y, and Z coordinates based on that listings law. So the new object can be present somewhere away from the actual object. Like a pilot, when he's trying to land, he will see one runway at the center and other runway somewhere here. All those examples we discussed in the previous classes. So that false projection will be there. So what are the physiological sequelae? So in case of a paralytic muscle, what will happen? Initially, the muscle is not acting. So suppose this right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed. Okay. So when the right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed, then what happens? When you want to look towards the right side in right gaze, the right lateral rectus should muscle act and the left medial rectus muscle should also act. So suppose what is the physiological sequelae of extraocular muscle palsy? To understand this concept, first of all, you take into account that suppose in my right eye, the right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed. Okay, in right eye, right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed. So suppose I want to look towards the right side. So what all muscles I need to act? First, the right lateral rectus muscle should turn to the right side and the left medial rectus should also turn towards the right side. Only then I will be able to develop the action. So here this left eye medial rectus is the synergist. I told you synergist is a muscle with the same action but in the opposite eye. So if the right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed, for the right lateral rectus muscle, the synergist muscle is contralateral synergist is left medial rectus. So as more amount of impulse is required for this paralytic muscle to move, similarly the more amount of impulse also goes to the left medial rectus because of Herring's law. As a result, there will be overaction of the left medial rectus. So the first point is overaction of the contralateral synergist. So first thing, suppose this right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed, the companion of that is the left medial rectus. So as more amount of impulse is required for the palsy muscle, paralyzed muscle to come into action, because of Herring's law, the same more amount of innervation also goes to the medial rectus of the left side. So there is an overaction of the left medial rectus. That is point number one. There is overaction of the contralateral synergist. Second thing is contracture of the direct antagonist. See, the right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed here in this case. The direct antagonist for right lateral rectus muscle is the right medial rectus. So the right medial rectus is the direct antagonist for the right lateral rectus muscle. So as this right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed, this right medial rectus tries to overact, because it is not, because only if this muscle is trying to act, suppose this lateral rectus is acting only, this muscle tries to keep up some tone. So when this muscle is totally paralyzed, this muscle tries to contract and try to pull the eyeball completely this side. So it will develop a contracture. See, the right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed. As right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed, the right medial rectus muscle is an antagonist. As per Sherrington's law of opposite and Sherrington's law, what happens is, if the right lateral rectus muscle is innervated, the relaxation should go to the right medial rectus. as per Sherrington's law, what happens here? No innervation is going to the right lateral rectus muscle. So all the innervation is going towards the right medial rectus muscle. Hence, it will contract more and will try to develop a contracture. So contracture of the direct antagonist. So just remember Sherrington's law. As per Sherrington's law, when some amount of innervation is going to the lateral rectus muscle, so the equal amount of opposite innervation or inhibition impulse should go to the medial rectus muscle. So when this lateral rectus muscle is contracting, the medial rectus should be inhibited. But here, as this lateral rectus muscle is totally paralyzed, no innervation goes to this lateral rectus muscle when it is not acting, when it is in the time of rest. It's like looking straight. At that time, all the CNS input goes into the medial rectus, causing it to go into contraction. Excessive contraction is called contraction. And secondary inhibitional palsy of the contralateral antagonist. So now what happens is contralateral antagonist. See, for this right lateral rectus, left lateral rectus will be the contralateral antagonist. So it will go into inhibitional palsy. Because this muscle is not acting, there will be no more work for this other muscle, so it will go into secondary inhibitional palsy. So paralysis of one muscle, overaction of ipsilateral antagonist, overaction of contralateral yoke muscle, and secondary inhibition palsy of contralateral antagonist. This is known as phenomenon of comatization. Okay, that is very difficult to think. See, here again the same thing. Suppose right lateral rectus muscle is palsied, overaction of left medial rectus because of Herring's law of equal innervation. Similarly, there's no opposition from the lateral rectus muscle. So this medial rectus muscle totally contracts and tries to pull the eyeball towards the inner side. So there is a contracture of the right medial rectus. Similarly, inhibitional palsy of the left lateral rectus muscle. Here also again, just like the step 2, step 3, the Sherrington's law of reciprocal inhibition goes here. As per Sherrington's law of reciprocal inhibition, what happens is more impulse to right lateral rectus muscle. See, the right lateral rectus muscle is already paralyzed. When it is paralyzed, there is no impulse going on to the muscle when it is at rest, like looking in a primary gaze. So when there is no impulse going to the lateral rectus muscle on the left side, similarly, as per Sherrington's law, there will be no impulse going towards the left lateral rectus muscle. Thereby, it goes into an inhibitional palsy of left lateral rectus muscle. Okay. And what are the types of ocular palsies? Isolated muscle palsy. Only single muscle, lateral rectus or superior oblique muscle, can be palsied. Similarly, third cranial nerve palsy. Third cranial nerve supplies all the, I told you, LR6, SO4, whole trace, except lateral rectus and superior oblique. All other extraocular muscles and even the right upper eyelids are supplied by third cranial nerve. So if third cranial nerve palsy is there, you will be ptosis along with the extraocular movement restriction, and accommodation is also lost because ciliary muscle is supplied by parasympathetic part. Similarly, double elevator palsy, both the elevators in the same eye are palsied, superior rectus and inferior oblique. Total ophthalmoplegia, it is internal and extraocular muscles. Extraocular muscles are 6 in number, these recti and obliques, whereas intraocular muscles are constrictor pupil and dilator pupil. So that is total ophthalmoplegia. Similarly, external ophthalmoplegia, extraocular muscles are gone. Internuclear ophthalmoplegia, it's a complicated topic of the supranuclear path. Okay, supranuclear pathways. And what are the tests for paralytic squint? Hess charting, diplopia charting, and force reduction test. This is a Hess charting. So like this, you ask the patient to look at the chart. So wherever the muscle is not acting, there you get a slight underaction. This is not that important for you. Actually, it is nothing but you see the movement as some red color light shines here. You pay the patient to give him some green color. Ask the patient to look at the center dot and ask him to point out with the torchlight which dot is shining. So based on that, we can know how much is his field of vision and how much is his extraocular movements. It is not that necessary for you. And this is a diplopia charting. If the person is having orthophoria, it is similar to almost like your Maddox rod test. In Maddox rod test, I told you there will be one vertical line and there will be a dot. Similar to that Maddox rod test, this is a diplopia charting. There will be 2 vertical lines. Both can be overlapping one over the other, or they can be present one beside the other. And similarly, force reduction test. Suppose force reduction test is nothing but, suppose you want to test this lateral rectus muscle of this side, this left eye, you want to test this lateral rectus muscle. So what you do is, you catch hold, or suppose lateral rectus muscle, you catch hold of with the forceps at the opposite limbus. You see lateral rectus muscle inserts at this part, lateral part. So at the opposite limbus, you catch hold with the forceps and try to pull the eyeball in the same direction towards the action of this extraocular muscle, that is towards the lateral side. If it freely moves, it is because of paralytic squint. If it doesn't move freely and if there is a resistance, that means there is some tumor or hematoma inside the orbit, which is a cause of restriction of the ocular movements. So basically, this force reduction test is nothing but just you hold a forceps. With the forceps, you try to rotate the eyeball. If the eyeball is really paralyzed, see, this is the forceps and this is the eyeball. If it is really paralyzed, it will easily move. Suppose it is not paralyzed, there is some tumor here or there is some hematoma here. So if you try to move with the forceps also, it will not be moving. It is a test for a paralytic squint. Okay. What is the treatment for paralytic squint? Treat the cause, whether the CNS hemorrhage or whatever it could be, or if it's a restricted squint, see if it is due to any tumor or due to a hematoma or a fracture of the orbit, you see and treat the cause. Medications like B complex can be given. Just observe and see. Usually by 3 months to 6 months, it automatically clears itself and the eyeball regains its complete movement. If it doesn't happen, then we can think about surgery. And similarly, you can, for diplopia, you can treat with the prism. And for surgery, you can go in this following order. First, do that orbital surgery. Suppose there is some tumor. First, correct the tumor, then correct the squint, and then correct the eyelid ptosis. That is the sequence we follow. Now, all those things are not that much of important. So this is the main thing they'll be asking in your exam. So this table, you see a little bit clearly and cautiously. Okay. What are the differences between concomitant and paralytic strabismus? So this one is a 2 marks question, or even may it be asked as a 4 marks question, always given for in your exams. Okay. So concomitant squint, what I told you, ocular deviation is same in all cases. See, in all the cases, the ocular deviation will be same between both the eyes. In paralytic squint, ocular deviation varies in different cases. Suppose this right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed. In straight gaze, the deviation is one angle. Here, the angle is same, but when you look towards this side, the angle will be different because this muscle is paralyzed. Okay, so the ocular deviation is same in all cases in concomitant squint, whereas it is different in different cases in paralytic squint. That is the first point you have to write. There is no restriction of ocular movements in concomitant squint. In concomitant squint, all the movements will be gone, will be full. Whereas in paralytic squint, there is restriction of ocular movements. In those pictures you have seen, suppose right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed, the eyeball won't be moving towards the side. So there is restriction of ocular movements. Similarly, primary deviation is equal to secondary deviation in concomitant squint. Already explained it to you. Secondary deviation is more than primary deviation in case of paralytic squint. Okay. This is nothing but prism bar cover test. When you do with prism bar cover test, with the normal eye fixing, it is primary deviation. With abnormal eye fixing, it is called secondary deviation. So both are same in case of concomitant. Secondary is more than primary in case of paralytic. So as the concomitant squint usually occurs in children, it is gradual in onset. Suppression and amblyopia may develop in case of concomitant squint. It is usually seen in children. Whereas in paralytic, diplopia occurs because it is sudden in onset. Suddenly due to some trauma, due to some tumor, you develop. So there is no time for the brain to develop suppression and amblyopia. Hence, there is diplopia. There is no false projection of image in concomitant squint because one eye goes into suppression or amblyopia. No image is seen, hence it goes into, there is no false projection. But here, as diplopia is present, the diplopic object will be present somewhere beyond the normal object in the visual field. False projection or past pointing of the image occurs. Similarly, there is no compensatory head posture for concomitant squint, whereas for paralytic squint, compensatory head posture develops. Compensatory head posture is nothing but, suppose you have ptosis of both the eyes. So he tries to elevate the chin. Okay. Suppose this lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed. So the patient tries to turn his face completely, face turn towards that side. So this is a compensatory posture. Compensatory head posture is in order to avoid diplopia. Whenever there is diplopia, in order to avoid diplopia, the patient tries to compensate for the muscle. See, suppose the right lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed. So when the right lateral rectus muscle is not functioning, the patient, what he does is, if he want to look at an object at the right side, automatically he tries to turn his face towards that right side. So when the lateral rectus muscle is paralyzed, automatically the face is turned towards the right side. Similarly, for the respective muscle, suppose superior rectus muscle is paralyzed, the patient tries to elevate his chin a little bit so that he'll be able to see that object clearly. So that compensatory head posture develops in paralytic squint. It is absent in case of a concomitant squint because of suppression and amblyopia. Concomitant squint, I told you, it occurs usually in children at an early age. Paralytic is usually late in onset in diabetics, hypertensives, and elderly people. Concomitant is gradually onset. The deviation doesn't develop all of a sudden. Initially, it is 1 degree, next 2, 3, 4, like that. It develops gradually over 3 to 6 months. Whereas it is sudden in onset. Suppose there is a trauma, you develop a hematoma, immediately there is a paralysis. So, okay, that is how it is. Similarly, no precipitating events. Here, precipitating events like head injury, systemic illnesses, or neurological deficits might be seen if it is a CNS problem. Similarly, spread of comitants. I told you that secondary inhibitional palsy and all these things are seen in concomitant, but here it may develop at the later stages because it is of sudden in onset. Okay. Next, alphabet pattern strabismus. These are nothing but A and B pattern strabismus. Horizontal squint, which is vertically incompetent. No one is going to ask about it in exams. It is a difficult topic. Just remember that A and B pattern are present. It is a horizontal squint, which is vertically incompetent. A strabismus in the vertical direction, it is paralytic. And what is restriction? So that was about paralytic part, and this is the restriction part, mechanical restriction of extraocular movements because of tumors or fractures or thyroid eye disease or Brown syndrome, Duane's retraction syndrome, the eyeball doesn't move. Whereas in the previous case, there is paralysis of the muscle because of trauma or because of B complex deficiency or because of CNS infarct or whatever it may be. So what are the things you do? It could be strengthening procedures like resection. You can do resection, cut some part of the muscle and suture the muscle and shorten the muscle. So when you shorten the muscle, its strength increases. Similarly, other procedures are tucking at advancement. Similarly, weakening the muscle, recession or lengthening of the muscle. When you lengthen the muscle, its power decreases. Marginal myotomy and advancement. You just remember resection and recession, that is enough for your level. Strengthening procedure is resection, weakening procedure is recession. That much is enough for you. So what is the flowchart of squint evaluation? That is all not required. Or the same thing, that cover test, uncover test, how you take up everything is given here. And what is nystagmus? Those pictures, those flowcharts are from Parson. If you want, you can see from Parson, the spread of competence and this one, flowchart of squint. And what is nystagmus? This is usually an ENT topic. So nystagmus, it is an involuntary rhythmic oscillatory to and from movements of the eyeball. It is an involuntary movement, not voluntary. It is a rhythmic, it has a particular rhythm. It is an oscillation, to and fro oscillation movements of the eyeball. What are the types? It could be pendular nystagmus or jerk nystagmus. Pendular nystagmus means the eyeballs will be slowly moving towards the outside and inside. Gradually, the movement will be with the same speed in both the directions. Whereas in jerk nystagmus, there will be a slow phase and a fast phase. There is a fast component and a slow component. Initially, the eye moves slowly towards one direction and suddenly it comes back to the previous position. So jerk, it has a fast and slow component, whereas in pendular, it has the same amount of speed in both the directions. Similarly, based on the etiology, it could be central and peripheral. Central etiology means suppose there is some brain infarct or there is some hemorrhage in the brain in the pons. That is a central nystagmus. Whereas peripheral nystagmus means it is due to some problem in the vestibular apparatus, in the ear. There is some ear problem in the vestibular apparatus which is causing this peripheral part of nystagmus. Okay. So how do you differentiate between central and peripheral? It is a common ENT question for you. There is no fatigue in case of central nystagmus, but fatigue will be seen in case of peripheral nystagmus. And with particular head posture, peripheral nystagmus will be compensated, but central nystagmus cannot be compensated with a particular head posture. So these are all the various differences between central and peripheral, which ENT people will be teaching you thoroughly. And similarly, physiological and pathological. Physiological is optokinetic nystagmus. Suppose you see a fast movement. Suppose you are seeing this finger. This finger is gradually going like this, and you are gradually following this finger. And all of a sudden, this finger comes here. So what you do is, you rapidly, your eye does a second. So suppose this is a finger, this finger is gradually going here, you follow it, and suddenly when the finger comes here, immediately your eyeballs come and see this finger. It develops a second. So it is also a type of nystagmus. It has got a slow component followed by a sudden fast component. So that is physiological nystagmus. End gaze nystagmus, gaze evoker nystagmus, optokinetic nystagmus, all these are present in physiological part. And similarly, pathological. Pathological means it is due to some lesion. It could be some cerebrovascular accident or CM vestibulitis or labyrinthitis or some Meniere's disease or whatever it may be, different causes. Okay, and what are the components? Based on the components, fast and slow. There is initially a slow component towards one particular direction followed by immediate fast component. So based on the fast component, we name the nystagmus. If the fast component is towards the right side, we call it right-sided nystagmus or right-bit nystagmus. Fast component is towards the left side, we call it as left-bit nystagmus. Similarly, up-gaze and down-gaze nystagmus. So they are based on that, we name based on the fast component. And grades of nystagmus. You read it from ENT, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. Here based on the neutralization. There is a point called null point or neutralization point. Suppose there is a nystagmus. So when you are looking in particular direction of gaze only, the nystagmus is coming. Suppose when you are looking towards the right gaze only, the nystagmus is coming, that is grade 1. Okay, when you are looking in between the right gaze and left gaze and nystagmus is occurring, it is grade 2. Even when you are looking straight also nystagmus, sorry. The 3 grades of nystagmus as per your ENT Thingra textbook are, so grade 1, 2, and 3. Suppose on one particular gaze only the nystagmus is occurring, so that is known as grade 1 nystagmus. Only when you look into the direction of the problem part. Suppose the right ear has got a problem, and only when you look towards the right ear, right side only, the nystagmus occurs, that is a grade 1. Suppose when you are looking straight, the nystagmus is still occurring, it is grade 2. When you look towards the normal ear, that is even when you are looking towards the normal side, the nystagmus is occurring, that is grade 3. If I had told any mistake, once you revise from your ENT textbook. Okay, so as far as I remember, those are the 3 grades of the nystagmus. Okay, so with this we finish this class of squint. Thank you. Any doubts you have, you can kindly ask. In today's topic, only that's the differences between concomitant and incompetent squint. Only this part is the most important thing for you. The rest of things are not so much of importance. And similarly, Hirschberg's corneal reflex test, how the pupil right reflex falls at the center of both eyes. Only HCRT they'll be asking you differences between this concomitant and incompetent squint. They'll be asking you these two. You be thorough. It is enough. And then about this, what is a strengthening surgery? Strengthening surgery is resection, and weakening procedure is recession. In resection, you cut the muscle. In recession, you try to lengthen the muscle. That's it. So basically, differences between concomitant and paralytic squint. What is Hirschberg's corneal reflex test? What is a strengthening surgery? One example for strengthening surgery is resection. One example of a weakening surgery is recession. Up to this much is enough for you. Okay, you are free to ask any doubts. Anything you want to ask? Those Monday and Tuesday presentations will be shortly uploaded in the YouTube because there is a problem with these laptops here, so they didn't upload, so they'll be uploading. Okay, any other questions or any other doubts? Any concepts you want about the past 5 classes you have been dealing? Of course, Quint is a very confusing topic. So many concepts you have to learn. Little difficult with all those three subjects: SPM, ENT, and ophthalmology. It is literally really difficult to concentrate. So those must-know things you try to learn: is concomitant and incompetent differences, HCRT, all these kind of things. If you are thorough, almost you are done through that. Any other things? Any other queries or doubts? Because we have still a lot of time left. Online assessment, once I'll ask HOD sir and I'll let you know. I think they're preparing something, some question paper. So mostly it might be there shortly. It will be there definitely. The pattern and all they are deciding, they'll let you know in a few days. Are you clear with these concepts? Yes, it will be considered as internal exam only because you are not coming to the classes here now because of this COVID lockdown. So university is telling to conduct in this online mode only, all these exams. It will be considered as internal, take it seriously. Okay, any other doubts? Or shall we stop? Any others? Any questions, queries, or any concepts you want to repeat? Or if nothing, we'll call it a day and stop it here. Okay then. Thank you all for your patient listening. Portion, I'll let you know. I'll discuss with HOD and I'll let you know about the portion. But be thorough with all these things. I think Squint also they're going to include. So Squint also you learn. Squint also it will be definitely be included. If possible, next HOD sir will be taking glaucoma. Probably that also might be included in your internal assessment exam. So what all the classes have been conducted till now, you be thorough with all the syllabus. Okay. Okay then. Thank you all. I think there are no more doubts. Thank you all for your patient hearing and happy Doctor's Day to all of you once again. So we'll stop the class here for today. That's enough. Okay. Thank you. Same to you. Happy Doctor's Day once again. Bye bye. Meet you in some other class. Thank you. Happy Doctor's Day. Okay, then bye for now. We'll continue. Next glaucoma will be taken by HOD sir from tomorrow. Okay.
WhatsApp పిలిచి మాకు అందే క్లాస్ కదా Sir.